Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk to you guys about being more productive using Kotlin. So just as a quick survey, how many of you have written any Kotlin code? So got like three and a half people. How many of you have read about Kotlin before? Are any of you interested in Kotlin? Okay, cool. As long as that's there, and I hope to convert the rest of you by the end of this. So first, just who am I? I'm a mobile developer here at Atomic Robot. I do Android and iOS code, so I'm switching between code bases quite a bit. I just recently graduated from NKU with a master's degree in December, and I like hoppy beer and spicy wings, like I'm sure a lot of you also do. So first, let's just talk about what Kotlin is. So Kotlin is a statically typed programming language that compiles to the JVM, and it can also compile into JavaScript for the browser. But I'm not going to talk about that right now because I don't know. I haven't looked into it as much. But a big selling point of Kotlin is that it has 100% interop with Java, and more specifically Java 1.6, which is pretty important for Android developers. It was created by JetBrains for some internal projects and open sourced in 2012. So it's open source. You can read all the source code on their GitHub for it. And it's actually pretty interesting to dig around in there. So why make Kotlin? Like what was their motivation? So basically they wanted to add some features that they didn't necessarily have in Java, or change some things up that suited their development style better. So the language is very pragmatic. It's got object-oriented paradigms, it's got functional features, and it's focused on safety, conciseness of code, and tooling. So all very important stuff in my opinion. And another thing is Kotlin just works everywhere that Java works. So if you have something that's running Java, you can have some Kotlin code in there too, and it'll be a-okay. So I know a lot of you would not adopt Kotlin if you didn't know some big players were using it. So here is a billboard of people that are confirmed to use Kotlin in their projects, either internal apps or production code that's actually out on the App Store. So we've got JetBrains, obviously they use it. Square, Patrick, we didn't know if they were using it or not, so we looked into some decompiled stuff there. I don't know if that's okay to say. Got Pintrest, Trello, Gradle, and Spring. And what's interesting about Gradle is they're actually looking to use Kotlin instead of Groovy for Gradle scripts. So not instead of, but in addition to, or whichever you prefer. So also, I know some of you wouldn't use Kotlin if you didn't know some developers that were using it. So maybe you've seen some of these names before. So Christina Lee was quoted in one of her videos as saying, it's really incredible how much we can pare down without sacrificing readability. And that's in talks of converting Java to Kotlin. And then Dan Liu from Trello said Trello is happily using Kotlin in production. Romain Guy from Google says, Kotlin makes writing math code almost as nice as C++. I'd say that's a pretty big compliment there. I guess it depends on how you feel about C++. I would say, okay. It could go either way there. And then Jesse Wilson from Square was able to convert one of their apps from 5,400 lines to a little under 5,000 lines of Kotlin. So just before I get talking about why I like it so much, basically what I want this presentation to be is, if you haven't used Kotlin, I want you to consider using it. If it's for a side project or just something you want to write just a simple little thing that says hello world, I want you to try it. If you have used Kotlin, I want you to use it more. I want you to get better at it. And I also want you to look into things that Kotlin can do better, because it is a growing language. They're, they're open to suggestions. You can tweet at them or just open a issue on GitHub or something. And if you're pretty good at Kotlin, I want you to show me good ways to do things in Kotlin, because I want to learn how to do things better in Kotlin. And what I don't want this presentation to be is a religious war against Java, because that's not what it is at all. I love Java. I still write Java. I just sprinkle some Kotlin in every now and then. OK. So first, if you want to get set up using Kotlin and you're using IntelliJ IDEA or Android Studio, you can set it up with an existing Java project by bringing up the action menu. Have you guys all used the action menu before? Just Command-Shift-A if you're on Mac, Control-Shift-A if you're on Windows. And I think that's the same on Linux. And then you just type in configure Kotlin. So that'll look something like this. So you just type in configure Kotlin, and you can see you can configure Kotlin in this project or configure Kotlin that targets JavaScript in the project. And then you just select the module you want to use and let it run. And it'll, if you're using Gradle, it'll add that stuff to add Kotlin to Gradle, add the tasks there and everything. And then the easiest way to start writing Kotlin once you have it set up is to just convert existing Java code, because you already know what that looks like. So if you can see it in Kotlin, you'll know exactly what it's doing. So again, you just bring up the action menu. So we've got a normal looking activity there, just the one that comes up when you say new activity in Android Studio. It's got a fab. It's got the on-click listener. And then you just type in convert Java file to Kotlin file. And it looks like they actually have a shortcut for that. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. And then, boom, you have some Kotlin code. So I'll leave this up for a second so we can just look at how it looks. So if you notice, we've got variable declarations with val there. That's basically saying this variable is final. It won't change. And then we've got Lambda syntax there with our set on-click listener without jack or retro Lambda. And then we also have that casting with as. So if you see val toolbar equals find view by ID, and we cast it as a toolbar. So that's a little bit different syntax than casting with parentheses. So just some interesting stuff there. Is everyone good on that? OK. Oh, the question mark after bundle. I'm actually going to start talking about that in a second. You're good. So I just want to talk about some things that I really like in Kotlin. So the first one is nullability as a type. So we all know Java has null pointer exceptions, and sometimes they happen a bit too often. So right here in our Java code, we're defining a string that is equal to test. Sometime down the road later, it gets set to null, and then we try to get the length of it. Well, we're going to get a runtime exception, and our app's going to crash. And that's unfortunate, but it happens. But with Kotlin, we can move those runtime exceptions to compiler errors with nullability as a type. So if you look at the code below under the Kotlin there, we're setting variable string, we're typing it as a string, and we're setting it equal to test. So if we come down later and say string equals null, it's not going to let us do that. The compiler is going to tell us, like, hey, you can't assign this variable to null. And that's because the string type does not have the optional question mark. So the question mark means this value is optional. It can be null. It's basically like annotating with nullable versus non-null or whatever. So here, down at the bottom, we're defining an optional string called str, and we're setting it to null after we assign it to test, and then we're calling .length on it. And you think, well, wouldn't that cause a null pointer exception? Can everyone see that? Yeah, I'll see that. OK. So wouldn't that cause a null pointer exception anyway? Just calling, you did just set it to null, and now you're trying to call something on it. But we'll actually get to that in a second. So basically, to sum up, nullable you add a question mark to the end of the type, and never null, you add, you just have your normal type. And yeah, like I said, this helps push runtime exceptions to compiler errors so you can catch them before shipping your app. So we talked about that length call. So why is that not a null pointer exception? What's different there? So the question mark after str there, str question mark dot length, that's called a safe call. Has anyone ever written any Swift? Okay, so that probably looks pretty familiar to you. That's a safe call, so you're trying to unwrap the value in str, and if it's null, nothing after that question mark will get executed. So if str is null at the moment of execution, anything after that question mark just doesn't happen.
If the variable is nullable, would it be valid to say str dot length and not have a question mark?
So that is actually a compiler warning. It might be a compiler error to do that. So if you know that it's not going to be null at that time, you can use exclamation mark instead of the question mark, and then that will force unwrap it. So that's where you can run into some null pointer exceptions.
Possibly I want it to have a runtime error too.
Right. Yeah. If you want to force that.
Can you do that with the exclamation points?
Yeah, 2 exclamation points instead of the question mark there. Yeah. And also, if you tried to assign like var string length equals str question mark dot length, since Kotlin's got inferred typing, that would type that variable as an optional integer. So if you wanted to see if that integer had a value, you would have to unwrap that one. So kind of carries over the optionalness to what you're assigning it to. So if you've ever seen Java code like this, and I hope you guys don't write Java code that looks like that, but this is just trying to illustrate the chaining that you can do with this. So if you're checking an inner property of an object called outer to see if it's null, and then doing it in something else in inner, and then calling that on something. So you can just replace that with 2 question marks, and saves 4 lines, and still wouldn't want to write Kotlin code that looks like that, but I'm trying to prove a point. Okay. So another thing that Kotlin does well is representing data. So I'm going to start out by making a plain old Java object that represents a server response. We got message, status code, and a body. So just like something you get back from a server or something. So add some getters and setters, because that's normal Java style. So that's fine. Equals in Hashcode, because we want to compare things. So it's getting kind of big. And then let's just add a builder to it. So I don't know if any of you guys can see that, but it's about 90 lines of Java. And I don't really know if 90 lines of code is worth it for 3 properties. I don't know if any of you guys think so. And if you wanted to add a 4th property, you got to go in there and either regenerate that code that IntelliJ can generate for you, or manually put it in yourself. Either way, it's a lot of code for very little value. So some other projects, such as Google Auto Value, solve this with annotations. But Kotlin actually has a pretty cool way of solving it as well. So first off, it says data in front of the class. So you're saying this class is going to be used for data. And then this part right here is the constructor, and also the declaration of the variables for the object. So server response has properties message, status code, and body, and you can call it with a normal constructor syntax and pass those in. And believe it or not, those 5 lines with the spacing is equal to the 90 lines of Java that we just saw. So you get Hashcode, you get equals and toString, all for free. And I've got some proof that you do. So open up a gist here so you can see, can you guys see that? So this is a bit different. I put an annotation on there, but there's our class with our constructor. And then if we look at what the class file looks like after it gets compiled, we've got our get message, set message, get status code, set status code, all our overloaded constructors because of that annotation, some component methods that allow you to do some builder type things, and then a couple of other things called copy, and then we've got toString, hashcode, and equals. So we get a class our output there is about 20 lines or 16 lines of methods that we can call. Yeah.
How does this play what role with Dex Count?
Oh, okay. It doesn't. It generates a lot of methods, right? But you know, multi-dex is a thing.
I don't know what multi-dex is.
That's fine. This talk isn't for you then. Okay. So what about the builder, right? I had a builder in there. It's not a one-to-one yet, so we'll show how to solve that. And it's solved with something called named and default parameters. So changing our data class, all I did here was I put equals success equals 200 and equals body there. And what that means is you can construct the object without passing in those parameters, and that will be their value. So if you don't pass in a message, it'll just be set to success. But you know, how do you not pass in a message when order matters in constructing? That's where named parameters come in. So if you see down here, down at the bottom, I'm kind of going out of order here. We can name our parameters outside that we're going to pass in to the constructor there. So we want to set status code equal to 404 and our message to not found. And then our and then our body will just be set to equal to body. So back to the builder. Say we have a new server response, and we want to just get a copy of it. So we can call server response.copy, and that will give us a deep copy of the object. So we get all the fields reassigned. We don't just get a memory address. We get an actual new object. But that's not super interesting. What if we want to change something? We can call copy with our named parameters and pass in the new values we want to set. So if we only want to change a couple values, we can do that with this. And what I found is this really helps in testing suites. So if you say you want to make a piece of data or a model and then perform some operation on it and then just verify that one of the properties is changed. You don't have to go and have two long constructors or anything, and you don't have to make a lot of code there. And just as a quick Java interop tip, if you annotate a method that uses default params with @JVM overloads, you'll get the overloaded method signatures in Java. So we have this example function, and it takes in str and number. And if we use this @JVM overloads when we provide default values, you can see the Java code down here. We get example with no arguments, example with just string, and example with string and int. So is everyone following? I'm not going too fast or anything? Everything's cool? Okay. So does anyone here really like writing static util classes that just says date utils and then it's got a bunch of stuff, and then Greg likes them, okay? And then you have to remember, okay, do I have a class for that, or am I using something else? Okay, so I don't like doing that. It's annoying to me to have a bunch of, okay, I call date utils dot something. So we can actually use extension functions in Kotlin. So I know some people have used Swift before. These are very similar to extension functions. C# has them too. So we can define extension functions that allow us to extend objects without actually subclassing them. So to illustrate this, I'm just going to add a hide keyboard method to Android's view class. So the only thing different here is we have fun and then view dot hide keyboard. So that means anything that is a view can call this. Okay. Yeah, so there you go. That's the spot I was trying to highlight. And then I already talked about as earlier, so that's just casting there. And Kotlin developers realized how powerful this was. So they added a lot of functionality to the Java existing library objects that they could have used without having to create new subclasses of those things. And that also adds to your Dex count, unfortunately. Okay. And then just another quick thing is string interpolation. So I don't really like having to remember how to write format strings or look it up or anything, or mess with string builders. So up top we have say hello function that just takes a name string, and if you just want to put a variable in a string, you just put a $sign in front of it, you get the name. If you want to access a property of a job, like the job detail has a job title, so you can execute code in there if you include the curly braces around what you're doing. So $curly brace, what you do, close the curly brace. And then also you can actually execute a lot of code in there. So we're passing a nullable string in here, and if that is null, we just want to print whoops. So that middle thing there, the $:, that's like a free null check. Like if this equals null, do after that kind of thing. So that's called the Elvis operator. And Patrick said I had to do an Elvis impression, and I'm not going to.
Are there ternaries in Kotlin?
There are not.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. So, and just another thing about Kotlin, I know I showed you a bunch of code things that would make your life more convenient. Not necessarily things that would sell you to switch to a different language. I think this one's probably what made me want to use it more often. Is I was just having fun when I was writing it. Like, I was looking forward to, I already have fun writing Android apps, but just being able to write them in Kotlin just, re-energized me to want to write more code, write better code. I was just having fun with it. So a lot of the times I felt like I was fighting a language instead of writing useful code, solving actual problems. So that's just me. And like I said earlier, I'm iOS and Android, and currently I'm on a project where I'm doing both. So I have a Kotlin Android project that's in production now, and I also have an iOS Swift project that's in production. So it is pretty easy to go back and forth between those two languages since they carry a lot of the same ideas. And it's also very easy to go back and forth between Java and Kotlin because, if you want to just do something in Java, just, do it in Java. No one's going to blame me for it. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows and all that. I know there's always some problems with languages. So here's just a couple pain points I had. I fit them all in one slide, so it makes it look like there's less. This isn't an exhaustive list anyway. This is just what I could think of. So static methods and static variables aren't a thing in Kotlin. They're just not a feature. But you can have static-like functionality through things called companion objects. So companion objects are just little sections of code that you say, you know, this is an object that has these things. And you're basically defining the object statically. Yeah?
What about static finals?
Static what?
Final?
Static final? Static just isn't a keyword. Yeah, it's not a reserved word or anything. But if you want a static final-like thing, you can use a val in a companion object. So if you have like an activity intent builder and you need like some keys there, you would just set up the thing in the companion object. And you know, I showed you the IntelliJ code converter. Sometimes the code there isn't exactly the same. It's not really the straight one-to-one translation. And sometimes it can just kind of be bad, so you just got to fix it up. It's honestly, though, for all that it's doing, 99% of the time, it does a great job. And if any of you guys use Parceler, I don't know if you do, anyone. So Parceler, you have to set a serialization type to use it with data classes. I had to find this out the hard way because I got, you know, hundreds of warnings about my data classes not needing reflection to parcel them. So I was like, oh, that's not good. So you have to change the parcel serialization type to type bean. And you also have to provide default values, whether that be null or whatever you figure is a good default value. And then this one was probably the most annoying one. So I was trying to inject something that was scoped with our API scoping. And in order to do that, in order to have multiple annotations, you have to use this @field : open square brackets, and then your two annotations. And I think that is just the weirdest syntax I've ever seen for that. It was not obvious at all that that's what it needed. And I think they could have documented it better. But also, you know, also you just kind of like learn with these things, and they're still growing, so they might make that better in the future. And Dex Count here. So this is from a Jake Wharton post because I didn't feel like doing it myself. This was from an old build of Kotlin. So just adding the Kotlin runtime and the Kotlin standard lib added about 6,600 methods to your Dex Count. So if that's a big issue for you, maybe don't bring in Kotlin. But you know, you don't have to just use Kotlin on Android. You can use Kotlin on the server, or you know, Kotlin just to write little util things, or you know, Kotlin in the browser if you want to do JavaScript. So if that's a big deal, maybe don't use Kotlin in Android. That's fine. And build times were another issue, and there's actually a really good blog post on Medium that I linked here from Keep Safe Engineering. And this, I don't know if you can read this, but that's 10 consecutive clean builds with the Gradle daemon. So you can see Kotlin is kind of slow on the first one, a little slower than Java, but then it really, you know, it's comparable. It's not like Kotlin's going to make your build times twice as long. It's actually, I think for the development time you're saving, it's actually worth it. Okay, so just some future goals for Kotlin as a language. JetBrains outline them on their website here. So just constant performance updates on the Kotlin toolchain. So incremental compilation in Gradle, and then also JavaScript support is another big thing on their map. They want to actually nail that down. And then support generating Java 8 bytecode with the optimized lambdas. So yeah, and then they say, you know, this is a commitment from them. Java 6 is going to be supported as long as Android users need it. So that's good news for us. Okay, so
Streams.
Streams?
Are those on the horizon for Kotlin?
Like Java 8 streams?
Yep.
I don't know. That's a good question. They most likely are. They've got, it's called KEEP, and it's like an acronym. I don't know what it stands for, but it's basically their roadmap for Kotlin. So if it's either, you know, if it's coming up, it's going to be on that GitHub page. And if it's not, you can suggest it. Yep.
Is there an RX column?
There actually, I think there is, but I think it's just different bindings that call into RxJava. I don't use it.
This might be a silly question, but at the beginning you were talking about how you don't get runtime errors for nulls.
You do get runtime errors for nulls.
You do?
But it's just easier to avoid them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you set a value as nullable, you will get the
and you try to access it without the safe call, you will get a null pointer exception.
However, if you don't explicitly set a variable to be nullable, you'll get a compile time error.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
I assume you're writing Android code in a mix of
Yeah.
the two languages, Java and
Mm-hmm.
this. And also, does when you're debugging, do you end up debugging the code all in Java? The debuggers work?
Yeah, so he's asking if the debuggers work in Kotlin, and yeah, it just works like they would in Java. You set your marker in the Kotlin code, and it'll just hit it in the Kotlin code.
Okay.
So
I could write 100% Kotlin and be oblivious to any Java going on.
yeah, exactly. So he's just asking, you can write 100% Kotlin, and it'll just behave like a normal project. But you can also mix them all together, 50-50.
Internally, though, is the Kotlin being cross-compiled into Java and then running in the Java machine?
That's right. So the Kotlin code is being turned into Java bytecode and then running on the JVM.
It's not so much being turned into Java, but being turned into what it compiles down to.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yep. Ben?
Any experience with ProGuard with Kotlin?
So he's asking if I had any experience with ProGuard. I assume you mean bad experiences with that?
Have you used Kotlin with ProGuard?
Yeah.
Is there anything?
So I've used Kotlin with ProGuard, and as far as I can tell, no issues. It worked fine.
Does it lower your dex?
What's that?
Does it lower your dex count?
Does
To what would be expected from, say, just normal?
I don't pay super attention. I don't pay super close attention to my dex count. I'm multi-dex from the start. I know that's a bad word to one person here. Does anyone else have any questions?
How practical is it to write Android apps 100% in Kotlin? Is that like lots of applications can be 100% Kotlin?
I think, so he's asking if it's practical to write apps 100% in Kotlin. And I'd say if you want to, you definitely could. There's no reason why you couldn't just do Kotlin all the way through. One of my actual goals is, so I want to try to learn Kotlin for a server-side kind of stuff. So I want to write a full stack application all the way in Kotlin, server-side, and then when that JavaScript browser stuff comes along, I want to write a web front end in that, and then an Android application in Kotlin, so all the way down. I know that's a dream a lot of people have for different languages, but anyone else?
One of his quotes earlier from Daniel with Trello. They don't include that, but any new feature calls that they're doing in Trello, the Android app, think about in Kotlin.
Right, so anything new in Trello is all in Kotlin, and that seems to be a common adoption pattern. You kind of like leave the legacy code that's already there, already well written. You don't have to go shake the bee's nest at that. You can just gradually add it in as you need it. But it's really addicting to add Kotlin into your code base, because once you start, you're like, this could be done better this way over here, and then you just start converting things.
So you can still instantiate Java objects just like you would anything else in Kotlin?
Yeah. So the only thing would be you don't use the new keyword. So it's just object constructor params.
Can you access like static things with Java from Kotlin?
So he's asking if you can access static methods from Kotlin, and yes, you can. And you can also, with companion objects, it adds a bit more syntax going the other way. So if you have a companion object calling from Java, you have to do your object dot companion dot whatever you're doing. So it's just a bit of extra syntax you have to do there. Anything? No one? Cool. So if you guys want to go out and try Kotlin, the top link there is a bunch of just small Kotlin exercises you can try in an online editor. So that's on the Kotlin Lang website. There is a free list or a free lecture on an introduction to Kotlin by Ryan Harder. So I don't know, he contributes to the Google Auto Value project and a bunch of other things. There's a nice blog post on adopting Kotlin for a production app from corda.net. And then, if you have any question, or if you don't know how something really works in Kotlin, the best place to always go to is the docs. The docs are really well written, and if something is confusing, you can hit them up on the Kotlin Slack and be like, this part of the docs isn't really well written, and I'm sure they'll either explain it or make that part of the docs better. And if you want to talk Kotlin with me, I'm available at these links. My GitHub, I'm on Cincy Tech Slack at brandon.wever, and my email there, brandon@madebyAtomicRobot.com.